Okay, guys, let's get going. I want to welcome you to the Freedom Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Jim, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here and glad to see all of you. We're small but mighty today, and we're going to have some fun. We're studying the big book together. This meeting is an hour and a half in length, and we take a 10-minute break at the halfway point. We have been studying the 5th chapter, and today we will continue our discussion of the 12 steps. Please join me in a moment of silent meditation, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you. Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And Alcoholics, all right, you ready? Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. They may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. And there are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And it is, have we got anybody here today who's been out improving their resume or doing intensive further research? Hey, there he is. Want to give us your first name? Clem. Clem is back, and we're glad to have you, man. Good to see you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Anyone who's brand new, never been to an AA meeting before? How about anybody visiting with us from other groups or out of state or outer space or wherever? Okay. Yes?
I'm Shane, alcoholic addict. I've never been to this meeting. Hey, Shane.
Oh, we're glad to have you, Shane. All right. Give Shane a hand. Then, customary and traditional in the Freedom Group to read a portion of Chapter 5 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're very fortunate to have our most favorite reader with us today, Elizabeth.
I'm Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Elizabeth.
And my favorite to read this. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. And some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures avail us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 3. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood her. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to draw along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could ever lead to our alcoholism. C, that God could.
Good, Elizabeth. Thank you. All right. Today we're going to continue our discussion of the 12 steps. We've reached that part of the 5th step or the 5th chapter where the 12 steps are laid out for us. Keep in mind that when these were first written as part of chapter 5, this was the first time that the steps had ever been written down. And when we discussed that, I think last week, when Bill was moved to finally commit the steps to writing, they flowed out in just a half an hour, and he was surprised. He said he did not feel inspired, and yet when he looked to see what had just flowed out in that half an hour, those 200 words which had been changing the world, he was amazed to see what he had written. Especially amazed to find that there he had God right up front in the 2nd step and all the way through the steps. One of the things that is so beautiful about reading the Big Book together and studying it together is that, of course, the Big Book contains the steps. So at the same time that we're studying and reading the book, we get to study the steps as well in some detail. When we got to chapter 5, however, what we found was that all 12 steps are laid out for us. So this is our opportunity to do something which is not done all the time, maybe seldom. That is for us to see how all of these steps tie together, how they all work together, how each one builds on those which came before and builds toward those which come after, and that they all form a part of a beautiful mosaic, and that it is not possible to legitimately take any one step and ask it to stand alone, because the steps simply don't stand alone. They are spiritual principles, no doubt about that. One of the best known of those spiritual principles, which we find in religious and spiritual writings and ecclesiastical writings and in all of the major religions, also find it often enunciated by philosophers, is the absolute necessity of admitting our faults to another human being, that this is a very powerful spiritual endeavor, something which we must and need to do. But think about it for a second. What would be the point of admitting our faults and our wrongs to another human being if we don't know what they were? And so, of course, the 5th step, as we know it, depends first upon the 4th step having been done in a thorough and workmanlike and honest way. As we go on back from the 4th and the 5th steps, and we look at the 3rd step, it was absolutely essential that we come to a place where we make a decision that hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be our director. And we'll be the child. He'd be the father. We make that decision to go forward with the rest of the steps and to effectuate a full and complete surrender. And of course, we never get to the second step, the third step, until in the second step we've come to believe that there is, in fact, this higher power, this God out there who has all power. And of course, the key to everything before anything else begins is that we have come to understand and accept as a fact that we are powerless over alcohol, that we are alcoholics, that we cannot stop drinking on our own, that we must have a higher power to intervene between us and the booze, or we don't survive. I think we talked about this a couple of times, but remember that part of the definition of an alcoholic is someone whose body does not react to alcohol as normal people. We have an allergy, we're allergic to alcohol. And that when we imbibe alcohol in any form at all, it sets off this allergy. By definition, an alcoholic has this allergic reaction to alcohol. Of course, there's more to it. But what else there is to it really revolves around our spiritual bankruptcy. And one of the things that we find as we go through life is that just about everybody we have to deal with out there is spiritually bankrupt in one way or another. Most of the people we deal with in life, meet in life, have the same defects of character we do, because they're affected by the same fears that we are. The difference being that they don't drink over it. What we have found, therefore, is that the key to our continued sobriety is to understand and accept as an absolute fact that we can never safely drink alcohol again the rest of our lives. In order to effectuate that, in order to create that shield between us and the booze, it's absolutely essential that we seek, that we find, that we surrender to and become obedient to a higher power. And when we look at the net result of the 12 steps, we find that that's exactly what happens. In the 12th step, we are told that we've had a spiritual awakening. We are told that we have become God conscious, that we have entered the world of spirit, and that we have been restored to sanity. And all of these things are the result, the direct result of working the steps. So as we look at it, we realize that we cannot look at the steps except as a whole. And those who have experienced trying to half measure recovery in here have found it doesn't work. Big Book is absolutely right. Half measures avail us nothing. We don't get half recovery. The 12 steps are, as a whole, are the method of recovery which we offer here. We don't offer anything else. Oh, there's a lot of talk about other stuff, other human solutions, other cutesy pie saying, that kind of stuff. The truth of the matter is, when somebody comes in here, sick, sore, and wounded, crawling in on their belly, screaming and crying for help, what do we really have to offer them? We've got 12 steps. That's the program of recovery. Without the 12 steps, there'd be no AA. We'd be just another cockamamie group sitting out there debating with each other about our problems. And we could elect somebody to be a facilitator, and we could have nice group encounter sessions. But nobody would get sober. We wouldn't recover. The recovery that we have is lodged in these 12 steps. Now, last week we went as far as the 6th step, but let's recap just for a second, see how we got there. In order for the 6th step to be effectuated, it was going to be absolutely necessary that we have first recognized and written down and admitted our defects of character. the subject of that sixth step is that we're entirely ready to have God remove all these things, but we first have to know what they are. As we learned after the third step, it was going to be absolutely necessary for us to find and to be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us from God. Therefore, we start immediately upon our inventory. And our inventory is a hunt, it's a search to find out what it is that's wrong with us, what it is that's blocking us from God. Our resentments, our dishonesties, our selfishness, and our fears. And in doing our fourth step, we are led inexorably down the path where we will identify these four defects of character if we follow the directions implicitly and explicitly as we find them in the big book. Not some screwy forms or fill in the blanks or make check marks or any of that stuff. It requires that we write. It requires that we write narrative descriptions, that we get honest and thorough in doing so. But when we do that, the fourth step allows us to come out of that fourth step with a list of our defects of character as to which we have no doubt, because they've jumped right out at us. But that is not sufficient. We must then take what we have learned in the fourth step to our fifth step and articulate what we have learned. Admit what we have learned. Admit the exact nature of our wrongs. Why? Because our wrongs lead us to the fact of and the necessity for making amends. Now, when we do our fourth and our fifth step, we're finding out what's wrong with us. And what's wrong with us falls into three categories. One, our defects of character. Two, our insanities. And three, our guilts. And all of these are blockage to God. They all block us from the sunlight of the Spirit. We can't recover so long as these things are in there eating us alive, and they do. As we did our fourth step, we found out just how cancerous, just how ruinous these defects are. We found out just how badly we are disabled by our guilts in our search for a higher power and for surrender and to find some kind of comfort in our relationship with God. When we get to our fifth step, then, we're going to admit all this stuff. We're going to put it out on the table. We're going to make sure that we have not missed anything. We're going to make sure that whatever it is we found has been thoroughly revealed to not only ourselves and to God, but, of course, to another person. Now, in the process of doing that, some remarkable things happen. Absolutely remarkable. For example, it is in the process of doing the fifth step that we learn what we need to learn about humility. Humility has almost nothing to do with the seventh step, in spite of what you may read in the 12 and 12. Humility is a product, a result of doing our fifth step. Honesty. We learn honesty in our fifth step. Honesty comes to us naturally as we get honest, as we tell our story, as we put aside all of the dodges, all of the rationalizations, all of the denials, and we just tell it like it is. And in the process of doing that, because thought follows action, and we take right action, and we tell the truth to another human being, honesty begins to bloom in us. We also find by the fifth step that we have been relieved of our fears. The fears we walked in the door with are gone. Big Book tells us this. Our fears fall from us. This does not mean, of course, that the world and all of its people will not continue to threaten us, and therefore fear will reappear, and we need to be able to deal with that as it happens. For that reason, we have the 10th step inventory and the 11th step inventory, and we use those every day to make sure that nothing gets ahead of us ever again. As we do our fifth step, then, we are preparing ourselves for the sixth step and the seventh step and the eighth and the ninth steps. Without the fourth and fifth step, 6, 7, 8, and 9 wouldn't even exist. They would just be sitting out there as nice things we might get around to someday, but we wouldn't have the foggiest idea what to do with them. So as we have done our fifth step, what has happened is that we have found out that our defects of character are killers, they're cancerous, they're eating us alive, they have contributed to our failures, they have been a major factor in our spiritual deficiencies. We found out that we cannot abide them, we have to be free from them. We found out that we have no power over them, we can't get rid of them ourselves. We can't get rid of our defects ourselves any more than we can get rid of alcohol ourselves. And so we're going to need some help with that. But we remember then that in our second step we came to believe that God could restore us to sanity. So God can take these. Are we willing to let Him? And we came to understand in our fifth step, yes. I don't want to hang on to any of this stuff. That would be crazy. It's tantamount to saying to the surgeon who's about to excise a cancer, oh, just leave some of it in. It'd be kind of interesting to see what happens. Or a house full of termites, and they're eating your house to pieces. Tell the exterminator, don't kill them all. I kind of like those little bugs. But then we've got this wild-eyed notion around here, somebody keeps saying it. Well, God doesn't take all our defects. He kind of leaves some around, because He got a sense of humor. Lordy, Lordy, Lordy. Every time we put any kind of limitations on God's power, what we're doing is limiting God's ability to work with us. What's faith mean if it doesn't mean let go absolutely and trust God absolutely? Why in the world would we think that all our prayers having been answered right up to the seventh step, that now God says, oh, well, hey, guy, you're going to have to mess with this stuff the rest of your life. That's why I gave you this 10th step. That's nonsense. See, the people who say that don't understand the genesis of the 10th step. It came about simply because the Oxford people didn't have anything which was commensurate with that. They thought that they got to be perfect with their 6 steps. Our guys found out that that was nonsense. That they didn't become perfect. That the world and all of its people continued to threaten them. That there was a continual popping up again of these defects, and they had to have a way to take care of that. And it was, of course, the 10th step, which was, by trial and error, became that method, that spiritual method of dealing with life. So now, having reached this point in our 5th step, you see, we look at the 6th step and we say, the word we is in there, it just doesn't appear. We is implicit in each of the 12 steps. Because these 12 steps, of course, are the revelation to us of how the original 100 worked the steps. So it says, in effect, we were entirely ready. We were. Past participle. It does not say, in accordance with the directions of our sponsors, we made ourselves entirely ready by driving the speed limit, by putting quarters in parking meters for little old ladies on South Beach who were otherwise going to get a ticket, by brushing our teeth with our left hand, by taking a defect out of our jar every day and working on it, and then we get a major defect once a week from our sponsor, and we really have to work on that, and this goes on for 9 months. And I always ask people when they're doing that, how do you work on a defect over which you have no power? Tell me, how do you do that? I'd really like to know. What's the secret here? But that's not the 6th step. It's got nothing to do with the 6th step. The 6th step, by the way, doesn't say never or any of that foolishness. It says we were entirely ready to have God remove what? All these defects of character. It doesn't say, oh, golly gee whiz, it'd be kind of nice if we let God take a few of these suckers away from us because they're sort of messing us up, but we want to keep a few of them here. We just will never say to God, gee, you can never have these. That's not the way the sixth step is written. It's not the way it works. As a matter of fact, can he now have them all? Every one. And if there is something we're not willing to let go of, we ask God in prayer to make us willing. As in the eighth step, if we're not willing to make amends, we ask for the willingness until it comes. That's the sole big book remedy for the failure to be entirely ready. If we're not entirely ready, we stop, we don't go on, we start praying, and we ask God for the willingness to be freed from these things which are blocking us from Him. Because after all, on the very next page, what does it tell us? We think we're here originally because we're trying to set our lives in order. But it says this is not an end in itself. That our real purpose, get this, our real purpose has nothing to do with us. Is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. How in the world can we do that if we're laughingly going along with all of these things that we decided we didn't want to be free of? Don't take away my lust, God. It's one of my major pleasures in life, is all my lust. I don't want to be sent off to a monastery or a nunnery. Nonsense. Whatever it is that blocks us from God has to go, because it is the only thing that's going to save our lives. And it is the only way that we can fulfill the mission that God has given us, to carry His message to others, to work and self-sacrifice for others. This is the way we grow spiritually, and the only way that we stay sober. And so the sixth step is a product of the careful and honest and thorough workings of the fourth and fifth step. It is the direct result of them. And now we have a seventh step where we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Shortcomings, by the way, is just a way of Bill. He could not, for the life of him, use the same word twice. He had to use synonyms. And he got us all screwed up because there's always somebody who's going to pull out a dictionary and then come at us with the dictionary definition of wrongs, defects, shortcomings, and what some of the other words he used. And so now we have to suffer through this long diatribe on how each of these words has a separate meaning, and therefore the seventh step can't really have anything to do with defects because it has to do with shortcomings. Oh. Look at the prayer. What does the prayer ask? It says, God, take away all these defects that stand in the way of my service to you and my fellows. Right? There's no question about it. So anyway, the seventh step is a prayer, and but of course that prayer would be utterly useless, wouldn't it, until we have done the work of the first six steps. And then when we look at that seventh step prayer, we begin to see the enormous tie-in, the tie-back between the steps. Take the seventh step prayer, compare it to the third step prayer, and we find they're identical. Except that in the third step, we didn't know what was wrong with us, and in the seventh step, we do. But we're asking God for exactly the same things. And now in the seventh step, we've done the work which we promised to do back in the third step. We committed ourselves to go forward with the rest of the steps. And now we get the seventh step, and now we know. Remember we asked God, take away my difficulties back there in the third step prayer? We didn't know what they were. We knew there was something desperately wrong, but we didn't know what it was. But now we've identified them. Our difficulties, defects of character, insanities, and guilts. And we know what they are because we wrote them down and we admitted them. And now in the seventh step we ask God to take away these defects which stand in the way of our usefulness to Him and our fellows. So you see, they all just tie together. But one doesn't fly without the other. This is one of the dangers in reading outside material or even AA material which separates the steps and does not consider them as a unitary whole, because if we do that, we don't really ever get to understand the steps. Once having said this prayer, and by the way, the fifth step, and then an hour, and then the sixth step, which has really already been done, and then the 7th step. So 5, 6, and 7 are done on the same day. There's no point in screwing around with them, just get them done. The 8th step has already been done. What time is it? Oh, we've got a little time yet. The 8th step we did back in our 4th step, remember? As we looked at the second part of our 4th step is where we looked at our own faults. And we also looked to see whom we had harmed. And by the time we finished writing that list, we knew much of the harm that we had done to other people. Not only that, but we were already beginning to be ready to make amends, to set matters straight. By the time we finished our 4th part of our 4th step, our sex inventory, we had the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey says. Now we see all of those people we have harmed in our sexual adventures, in our relationships, which occupied a great big part of our lives. And there we have again become ready and willing to make amends, to set matters straight. And then it tells us, just as we're ending the 4th step, in the big book tells us on page 70 that we have made a list of all the people we've harmed and have become willing to make amends to them all. So we're going to carry that list into our 5th step, because in our 5th step we're going to admit the harm that we've done to others, and we're going to be talking with our spiritual advisor about our willingness to set matters straight if we can. So now, when we finished 5 and 6 and 7, the 8th step is done, almost. Not quite. Sometimes it's done, but sometimes, most of the time, we may have to add people to it. However, one of the things which is really important here is to consider the things which we must set right, and it's a very good idea, although this is not in the big book, but it's a very good idea to write down the amends we plan to make and go over those with our sponsor to make sure that we are at least in agreement as to what ought to be done. And also to see if there may be some people whom we have left out that need to be on there, because it is not axiomatic that everybody to whom we owe amends is going to show up in our 4th and 5th steps. Quite often they do, but not always. So we have to be careful that we're not leaving any stone unturned here. These amends become of crucial importance to us because, well, stop and think about it. We have identified our defects and our insanities, and we have also identified the wrongs that we've done, and the people we've harmed. Therefore, we have identified our guilt and our remorse and our shame. Now, we know that guilt blocks us from God just as surely as the defects do. Stop and think about it. How many times did we get short-stopped in our lives because we felt guilty, because we were ashamed? How many times did we feel that we were not really communicating with God, no matter how hard we tried, simply because of the guilt and shame that we had for the things we'd done? So it's obvious that we need to be free of this guilt. But how do we go about doing that? Well, you see, nothing is left to chance in the 12 steps. And this particular problem that we have is going to be solved, but only through our own actions and with God's grace. That means that the moment that we begin to make amends, we begin to lose our guilt. The solution to guilt, remorse, and shame is to set matters straight. Make amends. That's what works, and it always works. Doesn't seem like it ought to work. Seems like there ought to be more. Maybe we ought to be cudgeled and put in stocks and whipped in public or something, or put in a ducking stool to greatly chastise us for these terrible things we've done, and then we might feel shriven of our guilt, but that isn't the way it works with us. We get to be freed from our guilt by making amends. Great, huh? Now, we know that we're going to have to do this. Let me tell you that it is literally so that people who balk at their 9th step don't stay sober. And it's obvious why. They're walking around with untreated alcoholism because these guilts that they're carrying around are blocking them from God. They cannot expect recovery and at the same time be blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit. And so it's critical that if we're working with somebody, if we're thinking about this for ourselves, that we recognize that this is not an optional thing here. This is absolutely essential to recovery and to continued spiritual growth, as a matter of fact. So that brings us then, and by the way, if we find in our 8th step that there's something that we don't want to do, that there's amends we don't want to make, we stop right there and we pray. And the Big Book tells us on page 76, we ask for the willingness until it comes. Now, this should be no surprise to us because we started out asking for willingness all the way back in the 1st or 2nd step. And we know that when we go to God and ask Him for the willingness to do anything which is going to help us grow spiritually, we get that willingness. As a matter of fact, it's kind of ironic because before we ask for willingness in prayer, we must be about 99% ready to receive it because we know what's going to happen. If I ask God to make me willing, it is going to happen. Did you have a question?
I did, Jim. On the 9th step, I hear a lot of people talking about a loophole on this, except when to do so would injure them or others.
Yeah?
Can you give me an example of how that applies and how that does not apply?
Sure. That refers to making amends direct amends to a person whom you've harmed. It also refers to those who might be harmed in the process, third parties who are not the subject of the amends.
Okay.
So it doesn't have anything to do with us. There's a kind of a misunderstanding that goes around here that's referring to not doing something that will hurt us or others. No. That has nothing to do with us. It has to do with those to whom we must make amends and those third parties who might be injured when we do that.
It's just like it refers to like an innocent bystander.
Sure, or maybe not so innocent, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
We don't have the right to hurt anybody when we make amends.
I see. Yeah, I never understood that.
You're not alone. Ninth step is broken down roughly into 5 categories of amends that we must make. But there are some basic rules that we need to first understand. We are not making amends to be critical of those we've harmed, and therefore what the Big Book talks about is cleaning our side of the street. We never make them wrong. We stick to our own story, we stick to our own wrongs, and therefore it's not a debate and it's not a matter of any finger pointing. Never, we just don't do that. Also, we are forbidden to make amends in any case where the people we're making amends to or others might be harmed by our doing so. And this can be misused as some kind of an out clause which allows us to rationalize away the need to make amends. We got to be real careful about that. Making amends is something of extreme spiritual importance. And the Big Book reminds us, remember, we have agreed in the beginning to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And so making amends is that time when we get to complete our work. You say, but wait a minute, there are 3 more steps. Yes. But it is the 9th step which completes the work of house cleaning. It is the ninth step which leads inexorably to the promises and to what we also are told when we get into the 10th step, that by this time sanity will have returned. The promise of the second step is fulfilled. That we will enter the world of the Spirit, become God conscious, and develop a vital sixth sense, which will allow us to be in contact with our God. It is also the culmination of those steps which lead us to a spiritual awakening. The 10th, 11th, and 12th steps are those steps by which we maintain or continue to stay close to God and to grow spiritually and to perform His work well. And so when we look at the ninth step, we look at the 5 categories which are laid out. First category is the people we hated. Now, this is first because Bill or God, whoever wrote that book, I guess it was a combination of both, decided that we better get through that hump right away, because the people we hated are the people we have built up all of this resistance to ever wanting to make amends to them. They don't deserve it. Look what they did to me. Look how horrible, rotten, stinking, nasty, and dirty they were. They're responsible for all of my difficulties. That's what my counselor told me. That's what I learned when I went through treatment center, that all of my woes, all of my ills were the result of the rotten, dirty things that other people had done to us, done to me. But now I found out that that's not true, that I'm responsible. Nevertheless, I built up such a hatred and such a antipathy to this person, and yes, it's true that that resentment's been taken from me by God, but how in the world can you expect me to make amends to somebody who was that terrible? Notice that the big book does not talk about making amends to the person we hate. It talks about making amends to the person we hated, used to hate. Because, yes dear.
Where is that in here?
Where is that?
Yeah.
That's on page 76. The last paragraph on that page, you'll find it. I'm sorry, 77. I gave you the wrong page. Senior moment. I get to hide behind senior moments now because I've reached that age where I can do it. Remember, Ellie?
How dare you?
No. No, Ellie. Don't get huffy with me. Remember, I mentioned that last night, too. I'm hiding behind my senior moments these days. Page 77. You see that last paragraph?
Mm-hmm.
Talks about the one we hated.
It's not there.
Yeah. It's the second
Oh, okay.
paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
Do you find it?
Yeah.
The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. Got it?
That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to pray, and we're going to ask God for the willingness to make the amends and to give us the strength to do so. Wonderful things usually happen when we do that, because in the making of that amends we steer clear, we stay entirely away from all that whole catechism of this person's sins that we've built up over the years. We don't ever mention those. We stick to our own story, and we make whatever amends we can. And usually the big book tells us that what happens is that it works out very well. Once in a while we get tossed out on our ear, but most of the time, and many times, wounds and schisms between people that have lasted for years and years are healed, or at least there is a beginning of a healing process. So then the second part of the ninth step, the second category, is financial amends. Now, financial amends are big bugaboos for us because many of us have left town over them. You know, we've made geographics. We've We've hated to open our mail. We have hated to answer our telephone. We've considered all kinds of different ways of ameliorating the problem, including robbing banks and all this kind of stuff, and taking bankruptcy, but somehow we never got around to that. We just left town, or we had a phone number that we changed regularly, or however we did it. And now we've come face to face with the proposition that we're going to be required for our own recovery and for our own survival and for our spiritual growth to make these amends. And so there are ways to do it. And it almost always works out beautifully. Even if we don't have a dime to begin to make payments, we go to the people and admit the debt. We admit our wrongs, and we tell them that we intend to make restitution as soon as we can. Or, even better, we have a few extra bucks, and so we put aside $5 a month for this one and $10 a month for that one, and we go and offer to make payment on a regular basis. Now, a lot of the time, what they're going to tell us, especially if the debt's been around for a while, heck, we wrote you off years ago. We already took you off on our income tax as a bad debt. It cost us way too much money to reinstitute this obligation and to just say bye-bye to you. We're through with you. That's all. It's gone. Sometimes it's money that we owe to people, family or close friends, and usually they're going to say to us, oh no, just forget it. They get real magnanimous, But we want to be very certain that we don't just leap all over that and say, oh yeah, okay, I'll see you later, It is not for them that we make amends, it's for ourselves. One thing about amends is this, guys, we're not there to seek forgiveness from them. That's not the point at all. We're there to clear up our side of the street. We're there to be freed from the guilt. Now, it's also real important to understand that the ninth step contemplates the situation where we will not be able to make amends. As it was pointed out earlier, where we can't make amends if we're going to harm them or others. Many times the people we need to make amends to are gone, maybe dead, maybe moved away. We've lost touch with them. Now, are we therefore stuck? Are we therefore in some kind of limbo, a never land from which we cannot escape? Not being able to make these amends, are we forever foreclosed from being released from the burden of the guilt? No. That wouldn't work. You see, what God has done for us here is to bring us along a path which leads us to a place of surrender and obedience and makes us fit so that we can carry His message. So He's not going to make it impossible for us to do that. The whole answer to it is willingness. The whole answer. If I am willing to make amends, even though at the moment I cannot or maybe can never, as long as I'm willing to do so, really willing, not just saying so, but it's down deep inside, that willingness is there, then the amends are effective. Even though we can't make them, we are released from the guilt. And that's one of the most beautiful and miraculous things about this ninth step. Remember that we pray for the willingness until it comes. And if it is there, strange things happen. Just the other day, a guy I sponsor had expressed entire willingness to make amends to somebody who had moved to New York City. He had absolutely no way of knowing where he was in that metropolitan area. Could have been any 5 boroughs, it could have been anywhere. He was up there on business 3 weeks ago, walking down one of the main roads, main highways or streets in lower Manhattan, and there was this guy. Just walked right up to him. Thank you, God. He made amends standing right there in front of him in the jewelry district. with all the people running back and forth carrying their little satchels full of diamonds. Can you imagine if you were in the mood to rob banks, what a temptation it would be to see all those guys in black suits running up and down carrying millions of dollars worth of diamonds around? I often wondered about that back in my drinking days, how I could get well financially in a hurry. Now then, that's two parts. The third part of the ninth step has to do with our crimes, our criminal activity. This is a tough one, because there may well be warrants out for our arrest. A lot of people walk in that door looking over their shoulder, waiting to see if the sheriff's out there ready to pick them up on an old warrant. In fact, this is one of the most damaging things that happens to us, is that we don't clear that up. We go around in a state of constant paranoia and fear. And we're even afraid to find out if the warrants are still outstanding and so on. That has to be taken care of, and it may very well mean that we have to turn ourselves in and take the consequences. Again, remembering that we agreed to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. There is a catch here, though. Many times what's happened is that our lives have changed. There may be people in our lives, for example, now who depend upon us. We may have remarried, or we may still be married. There may be children involved. There may be business associates or friends who are utterly dependent upon our continued activity in the free world. In order for us then to make that amends by going and turning ourselves in, we have to have their permission. I can remember I've had two people I've sponsored who were murderers and had never been caught. And one guy had been a contract killer in New York City, and he had killed 7 people. He didn't even remember their names. He was married by the time we got working on his steps, and he had 2 little kids. So we discussed it at great length, and of course this was in New York, and I think they have a death penalty there, which would have meant, had he gone and confessed, and assuming that they could find out the crimes, I don't know, there were too many ifs there. But technically, I suppose he could have been in jail and prison for the rest of his life, or executed. And so there was the wife and the 2 kids, and they had to be taken into consideration. You can imagine what the wife said when she was approaching this. Would you give me permission to turn myself in? She said, absolutely not. So what I had to say to him is what the big book says. Well, you're just going to have to live with it. Do the best you can. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that by being absolutely willing to do this, if he had to, if he could, he was released. And this was quite a long time ago, and he's doing very well today. Sober, he's got 2 more kids, and he's a real credit to the community. The other guy, basically the same thing happened, although he had committed some other crimes, and he did turn himself in 5 different counties in Florida for these minor crimes. And he served a little bit of time in each of the counties, but he's free of that now. But these are the kinds of things that you will run into if you are sponsoring people and hearing their fifth step. Yes, dear.
Jim, we didn't hear what happened to the first one. Did he turn himself in, or did he turn himself in?
Well, he couldn't turn himself in because it would have destroyed his wife and his family. But because he was willing to do it, I'm assuming this because, of course, you're not inside anybody's head, but he's had a great life since then, and he's been a real credit to the fellowship and to the community. Now, for myself, I was made privy to crimes that a man had committed that wasn't murder or anything, but I was subpoenaed to appear before the federal grand jury to make me testify about what I'd learned from him. And so I refused to answer. So they arrested me and threw me in prison for that. So I suppose there's some risk involved in doing this stuff, but then these are the kinds of things that we have to willingly accept because it's all part of God's plan. While I was in prison, I got a chance to work with a lot of people in there. I would have preferred to do it by coming in and out. That was a pretty nasty experience. Anyway, yes.
No, I just wonder, how long were you in prison?
I was in prison for 5 months, and then I finally got to see a judge who had some understanding of what was going on. He had 50 letters from people in AA saying, "What in the hell are you doing? You people must be crazy." And a couple of people came there and stood up for me, and the U.S. Attorney had decided that I needed another year and a half to punish me for being such a contemptuous individual that I refused to testify before her grand jury. But the judge said, "No, I don't think so," and he let me go, you know. But
Did they understand anonymity? I mean,
oh no, I never said a word. They tried to get me back up there for trial, but the trial was postponed, and then that was it. So I've never heard from them since. So I wouldn't. I mean, well, no. Here's the thing. If I sit up here and I'm giving you all this stuff, right? And if I am telling you all these things that we need to do, and I myself am a hypocrite and a liar because I was not willing to live up to what I'm saying, how could I ever be here? Would have destroyed me. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is that I believe this is what God wants us to do. I mean, you know, here's the way it is. If I can say about you that you have integrity, I don't have to say anything else. And if I say about you have no integrity, I don't have to say anything else. We know all about you. And so this is far more important than being loose on the street. I mean, it just has to be. And believe me, I'm no martyr. It just, you know, somewhere along the line, you have to make a decision. It's going to be either this way or that way. If it's this way, you just have to stick with it, that's all. Besides which, I learned a hell of a lot in there. I found out something very interesting. If you're going to go to prison, wait until you get real old, because then you get to be pops. And when you're pops, they leave you alone. It really pissed me off. I didn't want to be called pops, but then I found out that was okay. You know, that's a good way to go. Okay, now the fourth category of amends has to do with marital infidelity or infidelity to significant others, or however you want to term it. There's a great tendency, you've probably noticed this if you've done a lot of working with other people, there's a great tendency to want to be shriven, you know, to get it off your chest and let me just run to her and tell her about all these women I was having an affair with and get her to forgive me, and then we can go on. At least I get it off my chest, but now what about her? Now, the Big Book talks about this. Is in many cases, the wife doesn't know, or she only suspects. In those situations, we can admit that we have been unfaithful, but we have to be sure that we clearly indicate this is the end of it. It will never happen again. And then by our actions from then on to show that that's true. There will be a great tendency there for the person who has been injured by this to demand to know, with whom did you cheat on me? Who's that other woman? And we can't tell them. Big Book says this: jealousy is the most terrible human emotion. And to turn a jealous spouse or jealous significant other loose on the third party would be a really wrong thing to do. If you've ever had an experience with that, you'll know just how vicious and how brutal that can become. Not because the person is necessarily vicious and brutal, but because of the jealousy and the hurt and the fear that's been engendered by that. See, here's something. It was wrong to begin with. It was dead wrong to begin with, and there's no way that that can be changed. So what we're trying to do with these amends is to be able to start over again. Even though we can't expect that all the wounds have been healed, we at least have an opportunity to go forward from here and to go through a healing process. And so the fifth category in the ninth step has to do with amends to family. And the Big Book tells us that this may very well be for the rest of our lives. And certainly that's reasonable. We've done a lot of damage, and we may need to just figure it's going to take a long time for these things to heal. And we read the chapter to the family afterwards, and we get a good view of that, you see. So,
I have a question real quick, Jim.
yeah.
On number 4, the marital infidelity,
Yep.
as a hypothetical situation, if there are children involved, and it could ruin the marriage, obviously, wouldn't that be other people? Or
Yes.
So you might not tell your spouse
Yes.
if there's children involved.
Yes. But these are the kinds of things that we have to sit down with our spiritual advisor and work them out. And we take these general principles of making amends, and we see we may have to balance the equities a little bit. But we have to come to some kind of a conclusion. You had your hand up first, then you. Yeah.
Freddie alcohol. Yeah,
Freddie.
you said something about like unfaithful and I guess disobedient. I guess not being true to God. I don't myself as God, but like my other partner. I wasn't being, and I believe it said in the book about something. I don't know what page it was. Ah, man, I'm so like, I'm at it. Not save my skin at another person's expense. So,
Right.
So that means I don't have to admit nothing to her. I just have to start all over, right? I can't. I'm not just gonna go until I slept with, so many like.
That's true. If to do so would be to harm her, you can't do it.
Can't do it. Thank you.
Yes.
I had a question. Let's say somebody like messed around with a married woman. Would there be an amends to make to the husband in that situation? I know this guy.
You talking about Billy Bob riding around in his pickup truck with his dog and his rifle in the back window? I don't think so.
Jim, over here.
Well, yes, ma'am.
I'd like to share something for the benefit of
Please do.
anybody who's thinking about making amends along these lines. My husband did that with me. He told me he was in love with my best friend, blah, blah. Worst thing he could ever have done. It hurt. It still hurts thinking about it.
Sure.
It was a long time ago, and we're a very long time divorced, and he's dead. But that is the worst thing.
Did you kill him?
No. I planned on buying.
Come on, you can own up. We won't say anything at all.
I can tell you now he's dead. No, I didn't do it though. No. That's the worst thing that anybody can do. It is so terrible, and you never forget it, and you never get over it. And unless, I'd like to share this also, in these times, unless there's a risk of AIDS or some other major disease that you've got to tell the spouse, don't tell. But if there's a risk of disease, you've got to tell.
I'm sure that's right, and the Big Book agrees with you about that. We have to be real careful in this area.
Yeah.
Probably the rule of thumb would be if she already knows all about it, then you make amends. If she doesn't, then you have to be real general about it. Maybe just say nothing. Yes.
Well, do they ever use in the Big Book? I can't. Do they ever use the word like conscience? One's conscience. I don't think it's in it. Like a conscience. That one has a conscience.
I don't remember that.
I don't remember it.
I think there's one phrase, moral consciousness, but I don't remember where it is. It would, but that's not, maybe that doesn't mean conscience in the sense that you're using it. To have a conscience, you mean? To have a moral and ethical belief system that's operative, not shut out by booze? Yeah.
It's really unconscionable to do things like that.
Unconscionable?
What you're talking about is integrity, I think. Integrity would cause you to do what I think Arnold's talking about.
Yeah, well,
Instead of conscience, it's integrity, right?
well, certainly that's part of it, but integrity is not just state of mind, honey, it's your actions. You take action which is true, honest, goodness.
And that's conscience, too.
Sure.
It's
Okay.
unconscionable when it happens all the time.
I know, but it's still unconscionable.
Okay, so it's unconscionable when it happens all the time.
Yes, it does. You know, that's a good point. It's a good point because much of what caused our discomfort and our distress was the fact that we knew what was right and what was wrong, and we made decisions based on self that went in the wrong direction. And this attributed was greatly to our sense of guilt and shame because we knew. See, we were not powerless over our actions. We would like to think we were, but the truth is we were not. And what the big book talks about is making decisions based on self and then acting upon them. And that action was dead wrong, and it was wrong when we did it, and we knew it was wrong. We did it anyway. And so that's a major part of the problem that we drag in here with us. That's a big part of our baggage. Ellie, do you have a hand up?
Yeah, well, my name is Ellie and I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, Ellie.
I would say that the reason that you would not tell your spouse your actions is not to save your own skin. I mean, you may, all of you, we may feel a sense of, wow, I don't have to release that information. But it's not to save your own skin. It's actually to save your partner's feelings, to save that other person's the trauma, the pain that person will endure. So that's something that I truly believe that you have to take with you to death, and how you deal with that, the pain, the guilt, the remorse that you may feel, that's something between you and your God. But
Yes.
You certainly cannot share that with your spouse. But it's not because you're all scot-free, because you're going to take that with you till the day you die.
Well, there's yes, but there is a imprimatur here, which is that if I am willing to do that, if I can, then I will be released from the guilt. See, God is concerned about us carrying a load of guilt around because that blocks us from Him. So the ninth step is really designed to allow us to get free of guilt, provided we are willing to do these things if we can. But there are many circumstances where we cannot do that. And you brought up a good point, Ellie, because if you look at, let's say you're sitting down with your families, let's say your parents, and they've suffered along with you as a practicing alcoholic for years, and you've done all kinds of rotten, mean, miserable things. To sit down with them and then parade the horribles to make them relive all of that, can't do that. We have to make an amends which are very general. They know what we've done. To make them relive it would be to damage them, to harm them, to make them have to not only to mentally relive, but to emotionally feel the harm and the hurt which they've already suffered. So this is why it's so important before we start making amends to make a list of the things we plan to do and talk these over with somebody. Hopefully we've got a sponsor who knows what they're doing. And maybe we need to lay these out for God and we say, God, these are the amends I plan to make. I'm not sure any of this is right. Please show me what you want me to do. That's a very good way to handle that. But there are no pat answers to this. Each individual case has to be considered separately. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm an addict.
Hi, Sharon.
That reminds me of something I recently heard from in a ninth-step meeting from an alcoholic from California. She was a woman who, in her alcoholism and in her insanity, had been stalking a man. And her amends to him was to not make amends to him.
Her amends to him was to
not make amends to him, to not contact. Well,
okay. Boy, that's pretty clever. Now, don't anybody listen to that now. My best amends to you is not to say a word to you. Hey, that's good, yeah. Well, that makes sense in a strange way. All right. Have we exhausted ourselves here on questions? Let's finish this up there, therefore, with the ninth step. There is the problem then of the people we have lost touch with, or who maybe have died or moved away. We don't have any way to reach them. We're going to make amends there by writing a letter, an honest letter. In the letter, we're going to say everything that we would say to them if we had them in front of us in person. With the proviso, of course, that if we're ever able to make this amend in person, we are willing to do so. Then there is the question of making amends to someone who has died. There are a lot of people who recommend things like visiting the grave once a year, or another amends which is often suggested. I guess it has some validity, I don't know for sure, but it kind of makes sense. That, for example, if I stole money from my folks and they're both dead and there's nobody to pay the money back to, that I commit myself to making a contribution to charity on a regular basis in their name. Or another amends that people like to make is to do community service. And they do that as a substitute for direct amends. I think the truth of it is that so long as what we're doing is dedicated to the proposition of making amends and our willingness is there, that it's going to be effective. Now then, when we look at the ninth step and the result of the ninth step, one of the things the book tells us is this. It says that the spiritual life is not a theory, that we have to live it. Now, that's pretty strong stuff, but let's think about that for a second. Compare that statement to the 12th step. What's the 12th step? Practice these principles in all of our affairs. What does that mean? It means that we are to take these steps that we have now learned how to use, and we are to incorporate them in the way we live our lives. We're going to utilize these steps as our way of life. And therefore, we are no longer theorizing about spirituality or a spiritual way of life. We are living it by living our lives in accordance with the 12 steps. That's what works. And when we do that, wonder of all wonders, we incorporate these great spiritual principles that have been around for all time into our very being, into our lives. They become the way we live our lives. The big book admonishes us that we are to carry a vision for God's will for us into all our activities. To do that, of course, we must be willing to listen and willing to be obedient. That we have but a daily reprieve, and that this is contingent upon our continuing to grow spiritually, the maintenance of our spiritual condition. All of these things then postulate that you and I will be working these 12 steps in our lives as a part of our lives for the rest of our lives. In the 10th step, for example, it tells us this should continue for a lifetime. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So now that we've reached the 10th step, 10th, 11th, and 12th steps, and we're going to look at those next week, these steps constitute a way of life which will fulfill the imprimatur of what we learned all the way back in the 3rd step. Remember that God will give us everything we need if we do two things. 1, stay close to Him, and 2, perform His work well. And by the time we've done our 9th step, we have become close to God. In the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps, we stay close to God by continuing to grow spiritually, by continuing to find out as it happens what's going on in our lives, to stay current with our present realities, to deal with them on a present basis, through prayer and meditation and inventory, and to carry the message to other alcoholics. And by doing this, what happens to us is that we not only stay close to God, but we perform His work well. And the promise is that He will give us everything we need. And that's true. That's exactly what happens. So next week we're going to get a chance to take a look and see how those 3 steps fit in with everything else that we've already learned about the steps, how they all fit together and form this beautiful mosaic. Thank you very much, and I'll be seeing you next week. God willing, the creek don't rise. I hope you'll be here too. And who wants to do the chips for us today?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's our chipmunk today? All right, here we go. Chipmeister. Oops.
Any white chips?
Are no white chips? Who's got a bunch of white chips they've been carrying around?
My name's Tammy. I'm an alcoholic. If anyone needs a white chip, you're out of luck.
No, don't say it that way. I'm not sure that's appropriate.
We'll have to give you a green one today. If you need a
Come
white
on up, Slim.
3 months.
Pretty soon when I get some wet ones.
Just listen, you live up to that now, son. We'll see you back here in 30 days, and then you can turn it in.
Yeah.
Okay.
3 months. Oh, come on.
Good going there, girl. It's all right.
This is my lucky day.
Yep, keep going. You're doing well.
6 months.
Come on, somebody just do it for the hell of it.
All right. If you haven't had a drink today, give God and yourself a hand.
Okay, who has a birthday in the month of December? A birthday. We're going to be celebrating here. How many years? 1 year. All right. Who else? Oh, that's right, I do too. 38. Wowie zowie. Something else, huh? I don't know. Thank you, God. Let's see. Any announcements for the good of it? Yes, dear.
1 year.
Oh, well, what were you... 1 out of 30. That's not bad.
Well, 38 and 35 up there. You were up there before. Someone moved you down, and I was after the 38 and the 35.
Well, you see, it's all those paranoids out there chasing me around. They always are getting to me somewhere or another.
Jealousy.
Yeah, jealousy.
Any announcements for the good of AA? Any commercial announcements? Whoopee parties, bingo parties, golf tournaments. Anything? All right, do we have any irresistible impulses? Burning desires? Let's close the meeting. Let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Let's have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering, and then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. Thank you. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.